Okay, so I decided just to stop it, go right on to the menstrual cycle. Okay, Leviticus 15, verse 19 through, I'd say about 30. No, 32. Till the end of the chapter. Chapter 15, 19 through 32. It talks about women's menstrual flow. And it really is like the first time that it was. There might have been something, a thing or two said prior to this, but nothing much. Now, this is why menstrual sheds, menstrual huts, menstrual shacks have played a part in Christianity, early Christianity, and other religions have this too, but Christianity always likes to point the finger at other religions when they're just as guilty of doing the same, because it's right here in the book. When a woman has her menstrual flow, she shall be in a state of impurity for 7 days, even though most, and I'm adding this part, even though most menstrual cycles last about 4 days, 4 or 5 days, she's unclean for 7 days. Anyone who touches her shall be unclean until the evening. Anything she lies or sits on or touches is unclean. Anyone who touches her is unclean. Anyone who touches a bed that she's laid on while she's in, quote unquote, impure is unclean until the evening. And that's only after he washes the garment that he was wearing when he laid on the bed or touched her or whatever. Whoever touches any article of furniture which she was sitting shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be clean until evening. Let's see, we got a footnote here. What is added by this verse uncertain, both quick and but has legislation. But if she sits on the bed or on the seat when he touches it, he shall be unclean until evening. Whatever that means, why that was added. Yeah, I can see why that footnote of like, why was this even added? If a man dares to lie with her, he contracts her impurity and shall be unclean for 7 days. Every bed on which he then lies also becomes unclean. So he said, we got unclean by proxy. When a woman is afflicted with flow for several days outside of her regular menstrual flow, beyond her ordinary period, she shall be unclean, just as during her menstrual period. Any bed in which she lies, and she's not allowed to touch anything. Anything she touches is unclean, needs to be sanitized, and it's unclean till evening. If she becomes freed of her affliction, now this is if she has a something that causes her to menstruate longer than her regular menstrual period, bleed for longer than her regular menstrual period, she shall wait 7 days, and only then is she purified. On the 8th day she should take 2 turtle doves and 2 pigeons and bring them to the priest, of course, because the priest needs his due for anything that happens in your personal life. The priest has to be part of it, and he has to get some offering of some sort because he needs to eat. Let's see, sin offering those of Holocaust. You shall warn the Israelites of their cleaning, lest be defiling. This is the law for a man who is afflicted with chronic. It doesn't really talk about men's STIs, but it doesn't really go into that much of a detail, but it does say, this is a law for the man who is afflicted with chronic flow or has an emission of seed and thereby becomes unclean, as well for as a woman who menstrual. Okay. So there was earlier about men who have STIs, even though I heard a couple modern scholars saying that this is not about, the previous verses were not about men with STIs. Yes, it was. Okay, so this is why the menstrual sheds came into being, because it was the women was considered impure, unclean, during her menstrual cycle. Anything she touched, anyone she touched, would become unclean. And if anything she touched or sat on or whatever, if anyone sat on any of that, then they would become unclean. But only until the evening. She's unclean for 7 days. Okay, beyond her, it would be a day or two beyond her regular menstrual cycle. So that's why they put them out in the hut So, originally, so they would not touch or be around anything that they, she might make unclean, and that would make havoc for the rest of the household. Like, it's not havoc for her, but, so then after a couple generations, it turns into, it turns really bad. It turns ugly because they forget the original reason for that, because nobody's reading their Bible or their historical texts. Who has read their Bible from cover to cover? Which Christian has done that? Hardly anybody. I'd say less than 1% of Christians have read the Bible cover to cover. And if they've done it, they've only done it once. And they didn't understand it. And they just took it for what, they didn't know what it meant, and what they did think they know what they meant, they kind of put it in their head as something else. Oh, it must not really mean this, it means something else. That's how they justify it. I used to do that. Anyways, there's something already here. You shall not approach a woman. Okay, this is Leviticus 18:19. You shall not approach a woman to have intercourse with her while she is unclean for menstruation. You shall not have carnal. Okay, yeah, I think there was. So, women who are menstruating, which is a natural thing, supposedly given by God, and then God uses this to condemn the woman, calling her impure and unclean. While she's in a state that God put her in, supposedly. So anyways, this is now the problem with menstrual sheds. First thing, it's ostracizing. Second thing, if anybody knows you're going to the menstrual shed, like any of your friends see it, the rest of your family, it's none of their business if you're on your period or not. But everybody knows because she's going to the shed. Now, also with the menstrual sheds, I heard on NPR that, I didn't even know people still did this. I know they did this in early, before United States was United States, early North, when the white man, just turn off the light, when the white man was still stealing the land from the Native Americans, the natives. I know that was still being, that was being practiced. And it was claimed to be, something God wanted them to do. I don't know when it stopped in North America, in the United States, or anywhere, but it is still being practiced, at least in Nepal, I heard on NPR, and I thought, wow, holy cow. But this is a different, I think the people of Nepal, I think, at least in the rural area where they're practicing it, is a different, I don't think it's Christianity. Of course, now these menstrual sheds are long forgotten the reason why they're there, but now it's become a cultural thing as opposed to a religious thing. And people have forgotten the reason for the menstrual shed, the where that came from, where that originated from, and it was the holy texts. But the problem is, a lot of these menstrual sheds are not well made. If it rains, the water drips in there, wind blows through there. I don't think it gets cold in Nepal, but if it did, it would be very cold in there. Also, there's instances of rape. There's been, instances of rape in there because they're outside the house. Nobody can hear them. Some of the menstrual sheds are kind of far back from the house. And if they're watching their TV or listening with their headphones on, they would not hear her screaming. So yeah, it's a scary thing, and it's degrading. It's degrading. It's nobody's business when a woman has her menstrual cycle. If she wants to tell her OBGYN or her doctor, or anybody else, that's fine, but it's nobody's business. And having them menstrual sheds is making it everybody's business as to when she's menstruating. And it's degrading. She's not impure. She's not unclean. If you believe in God, God gave her the menstrual cycle. Why would he give her something that would make her unclean? This is just some nonsense written by men. And men don't menstruate. So that's how we got these rules. From the Bible to the whatever religion you are, whatever text you're grabbing this from, was written by a man. So anyways, I really, I know there's probably more verses on menstruation, but each of them is like that. Either it's a repeat of what I've already read to you or told you about, or it's something along the lines of that the woman's unclean, and whoever touches her, whoever has sex with her, is also unclean. Let me see if I can see here what happens. You shall not have carnal relations with your neighbor's wife. You shall not... See, I don't think it says anything about the... what do you call it? The repercussions of the punishment for having sex with a woman when she's on her period. I didn't see that here, but I mean, like the scripture today is like Leviticus 26 or 27, and it says, you know, if you heed all my commandments, I'll bless you and give you rain. Your crops will be fertile. Your animals will be, you know, reproducing well. Blah blah blah. All these good things will happen. But if you don't, all these horrible, horrible things will happen. And so I'm thinking, if you're going right down to the point of like not having sex with somebody who's menstruating, okay, I mean, so many, all these stupid, tiny little laws. This is occult laws. How could anybody possibly not be sinning all the time? We're sinning all the time now. I mean, could you imagine how much harder it was to not sin back then when we didn't have the mechanization that made everything so easy? And we've got lazy people right now that won't get off their butts and go down to the mailbox and get their own mail. But yet, you know, we had all these laws back then with people who just, they had to use their hands to do and make everything. So how would it not be? It'd be really hard for me not to be cursing the Lord every doggone day back then. And when do you consider menstruation? I mean, now that we know like what menstruation is and all this stuff, what do you consider a menstruation? 1 drop of blood? Now that I wear a pessary, I realize that you start menstruating, technically you start quote-unquote menstruating a couple days before the blood actually shows outside your body. So what would be considered menstruating? I mean, this was written back when people were really ignorant. They didn't know how, you know, when women were fertile, they didn't know, you know, they didn't know all this stuff. They didn't know about ovaries and fallopian tubes. They had no idea of this. They didn't know that half of fertilized eggs end up in spontaneous abortion prior to the woman even finding out that she's pregnant. Of course, they didn't have the pee on a stick thing back then. But even now, you know, about half of fertilized eggs abort themselves before it could even show up on a pea stick. So, you know, they had no idea of this back then. They had no idea of an egg, meaning the sperm and traveling from the fallopian tube to the uterus. They had no idea of any of this. So what would be considered menstruation these days? Would it be different now that we have the knowledge that menstruation technically starts a couple days prior to an actual blood show? Because they didn't have that back then. They didn't have the pessary where you could, I mean, this is just all nonsense. None of this makes any scientific sense, and it's all misogynistic, sexist nonsense. Anyway, so my rant against how women were treated. Anyways, bye.